When we talk about gender issues, we cannot talk about it in a vacuum as if they appear without any, without politicizing it, contextualizing it, historicization. I mean, we need to look at histories of our region, where it came from. And we always say it's not about romanticizing what happened before.
In today's episode, we speak to sociologists and practitioners, Dr. Nof Nasser-Eddin and Dr. Nour Abu Assab. During our conversation, we address topics of a sexual nature that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the World Health Organization's #NoExcuse podcast. I am your host, Guni Dias. So let's get started. Welcome to the WHO #NoExcuse podcast, Nour and Nof.
Thank you, Guni.
Thank you so much for having us.
So both of you are known for bridging divides between theory and practice, academia and activism. How do you do that? How do you merge a world that is, focused on data and science and another one that is based on lived experience and stories?
What is an academic theory without the lived experience and also without speaking to the people it's meant to be about? And at the same time, what is practice or activism if it's not informed by the knowledge and the learning we already have? We don't think of them as in binary terms, although we do see, for example, we see activist movements saying academics are in their ivory towers. We also see academics saying, activists do not really rely on the theories that we produce. But this tension is a barrier towards further understanding and deeper understanding of the social world we live in.
Also, I remember when we were doing our PhDs, me and Nour, in the UK, we felt that we are not being encouraged to theorize. So we were so much encouraged to bring the lived experiences of people or to describe women's experiences. My PhD was about women and class in refugee camps in Jordan, Palestinian refugee camps. We weren't pushed to theorize. And it made us think, why are we always pushed to describe our lived experiences rather to theorize and write theory?
Where was that pushback coming from?
This is how academia manifests its colonial attitude in a way. So oftentimes, when students come from the global south and they're doing research-based projects, their supervisors tend to want to learn about their context. So what happens in a way, is they push their students to describe their contexts rather than theorize about them, which prevents them from theorizing. And by the end of the day, that enables the supervisor to theorize, leaving the student without that access to bringing their own perspectives and theories.
I want to pick your brains on the decolonial approach. I know you've written an important piece on that. What does it actually mean in practice? You spoke about it in the academia world. How does that show up in the aid sector? And what has been your experience around that?
Yeah, decolonial. We've been working on this framework for the last 7-8 years. And I think it didn't just start 7-8 years. I think we've always thought about it, maybe in our brains, in our minds, in our even spirituality. If we look at the aid sector, the NGO, the funding, we consider that as part of colonial structures in a way. Because if you have donor agendas, implementing projects in the Middle East, North Africa, Arabic-speaking countries, they come with a specific ideology. So that's why having a decolonial lens in the aid sector is really important, because we need to contextualize the work. We need to politicize the work. We need to think about language, the politics of translation, what is being talked about, what language are we using, also what knowledge is considered best and what knowledge is not considered best.
There has always been historically decolonial justice projects. Historically, we did not come up with that. It existed for a very, very long time. Decolonial justice projects, decolonial movements, etc. But what we noticed, particularly in the past 10 years, I would say, is that we would be in conferences talking about decolonizing the aid sector. And we'd be in conferences in academic settings as well, where they talk about decolonizing without actually thinking about colonized contexts. So it made us feel in a way that this is becoming really detached from the lived experiences and the realities of people who were formerly colonized and are still colonized and are being colonized. So that pushed us to think that we really need to find a definition. We need to think about it. We cannot just use decolonizing without framing it and also, giving it foundations in a way so it doesn't get appropriated. It also doesn't get whitewashed, because it got to a point where you hear the most abusive, oppressive people saying we need to decolonize. So it just did not make sense. It did not sit well from that very simple perspective. So when we noticed that both Nof and myself, we decided to create a framework that's based on the lived experiences of people, that grounds the lived experiences of people, and that does not make it just a buzzword. And similar to how localization has been thought about within the sector, like with localization, there were international efforts, the grand bargain came in, and we now have localization indicators. We have references for localization. We felt that decolonizing also needs the same work. So we've created a framework that relies on specific analytical pillars that can be translated into action and practice within organizations in terms of whether we're doing research, whether we're doing development work, or whether we're even doing humanitarian work. And these analytical pillars, there are 8, they basically propose that we need to be really sensitive towards context without also compartmentalizing it. We also thought that we also need to consider politics when we're talking about decolonizing, because decolonizing is about power and it's about standing up against power. And then we also thought that we need to be intersectional in our thinking so we don't leave anyone behind. We also talked about within the power and relationality, because power and relationships are important as well.
The politicization make things political. Like when we talk about gender issues, we cannot talk about it in a vacuum as if they appear without any, without politicizing it, contextualizing it, historicization. I mean, we need to look at histories of our region, where it came from. And we always say it's not about romanticizing what happened before. It's about understanding history, because without understanding history, we cannot really inform the present and thinking about the future. Language and the politics of translation.
And the most important one, radical self-reflexivity.
Oh, yes.
Radical self-reflection, in fact. This is the first pillar. And it also entails that we need to critique ourselves. We cannot always be in a defense mode. We would never progress. We'd never learn. So radical self-reflection basically calls for us to think about our own complicities in oppression as well, because we're all complicit, whether we like it or not. We all contribute in a way or another. So just to think about that, to consider that, and to consider with it our positionality, how our positionalities can, for example, cause harm in some contexts. They can, for example, be marginalized in another.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because that these pillars allows people to frame a context or a situation in a way that force reflection on what are some of the inherent biases. So thanks for sharing. Another aspect that you speak about is the myth of prevention, which is, I think, for organizations like the WHO, prevention is at the heart of what they do in the context of prevention to sexual misconduct. And I think organizations know that it's inevitable to have risks of sexual misconduct. And the way they go about policies and training is to prevent from that to happening, or prepare a system to be able to respond if something happens. But you critique that and you challenged it. Tell us more. What's missing in that process or in that mindset?
So for us, when we think about it that way, when we say, we're preventing sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment and other forms of harmful practices, it promises a lot. It puts a lot of pressure on organization. We've witnessed where organizations, they like in some organization, there are some cases where harassment happened or sexual exploitation happened, and they were so scared and ashamed from saying it because they felt that they're failing. So for us, we cannot promise so much because we will always inflict harm. Acknowledging that and put it on the table, rightly so, and being self-reflective allows us to say, okay, we are trying to prevent, we are trying to protect, but we cannot promise so much because by the end of the day, there will always things will always happen. Harm will always happen, no matter what, even if it was unintentional.
When we also look at data and how we interpret the data, there are issues that we need to resolve around the indicators when we monitor our prevention systems as well. Because we raise awareness around our around complaints mechanisms, reporting channels, etc. At the same time, we put in policies in place to basically say that we are zero tolerant. We do not tolerate these abuses. Now, what the data we get from that would be, for example, if we are increasing awareness around reporting mechanisms, then reporting will increase. We will receive more cases. At the very logical level, the cases reported wouldn't look good in terms of prevention. So it also means that we also need to rethink about how prevention is framed and how we are assessing our prevention efforts as well. Like what indicators we're using, how are we reading these indicators as well?
Just to bring another layer to this, because in the UN world, so some organizations call it prevention to sexual misconduct, prevention in response to sexual misconduct, and some call it protection to sexual misconduct. So that you talk about false promises or over promising.
How are we conceptualizing protection? Like those frameworks, international frameworks, they also lack an understanding of agency. If survivors and victims, they have different agencies, and I know, like well-intentioned, like those organizations, they want to support those victims and survivors by giving them support. But there are other ways. We have to think outside of the box when we think about protection. Maybe some people need an apology. Maybe some people want to do work with also the perpetrators themselves because they're part of the community. I mean, also we need to do a power analysis when we think about perpetrators and victims. Who are these perpetrators? Who are these victims? Are they part of one community? We need to think about the agency of those victims. What do they need? They need reparations. What kind of reparation? Maybe psychosocial support to the perpetrator. So that's why the myth of prevention, like we need to think about it in how do we conceptualize protection and prevention as well.
You mentioned reparations.
Okay.
How would reparation look like for an organization? This is a very contentious, topic to speak about, but I want to kind of hear your thoughts on reparations for victims and survivors. And also I'm, making a link as well on the decolonial approach as well. Because I know you spoke about this in your paper. So please tell us more.
I mean, also the decolonial framework allows us to think about what kind of justice we want to achieve. Do we want also punitive justice? In some cases, it's great, but in other cases, it doesn't do us any good to the community, to the perpetrators themselves, or even to the victims. For I guess reparation, it means think about it from transformative and restorative justice. Like, why did this harmful practice happen in the first place? Understanding the root causes rather than just solving the symptoms. In addition to that, the restorative and transformative justice approach, they allow us to think, okay, we understand why it happened. How can we repair it now? And reparation can take different forms. It can take, as I said, it can take maybe just an apology. It depends also on the agency of the victims, because I think victims and survivors do not share the same experience when it comes to harmful situations. We always have this example. If Nour and I were exposed to bullying, which we do in our trainings and our work, our experience towards bullying is not the same. Our reaction is not the same because of our upbringing, our childhood. Like, it can be so many things. So what I need maybe is completely different from what Nour's need as a victim, as a survivor. So I'm talking about bullying, but it can, like, we can also think about it in terms of sexual harassment, sexual abuse. So that's why we need to think about, yes, victim-centered approach, yes, but not with the tick the box exercise, with rather engaging with victims, engaging with their communities. They're part of a larger community. They're part of an ecosystem. So we need to understand why that happened, and also what kind of support, reparation we need to allow for.
I would like to contribute with a story, actually, because a real story that happened. And this happened in a country in the MENA region, and happened to some of our colleagues. Two women were in a taxi in Lebanon. And basically, the taxi driver harassed them verbally with sexual innuendo. They felt uncomfortable. They took the plate. They called up the company. They told them, we were exposed to this. The company completely ignored them. They didn't do anything. So what they tried to do is just do a tiny campaign against that particular company, because they did not take action. From the perspective of our colleagues and friends at that time, they felt that the taxi driver on his own comes from a refugee background, first of all. Second, he has family and children. And after they did the public stunt against the company offered to kick him out, to fire him from his practice. So from our friends' perspective, and they took on a transformative, restorative justice approach in a way, they said, no, they would not be happy with the company firing that man, but they would be happy with the company imposing safeguarding trainings to their taxi drivers. So, because from their perspective, it's the structural gaps that need to be addressed, not just the punishment for the individual. It's not a standalone incident. It's part of a system. It's structural. It's systematic. It's systematized. It's embedded within the everyday. So this is what we lean towards when we particularly talk about reparations. They may look different. Not for like punishment would not satisfy everyone. From some people's perspective, they want to prevent that from happening in the first place to others.
Thanks for that story. It helped us really conceptualize what we mean by reparation and being victim survivor centered. You also speak about key concepts that are important to understand if an organization wants to better prevent or respond to sexual misconduct. And there's a specific term that caught my attention, which is structural sensitivity. So we know about cultural sensitivity. For example, talking about sexual misconduct is sensitive here. We can't talk about it in our culture because it's not acceptable. But you challenge that idea and you say it misses the point when we say cultural sensitivity, and you switch to structural sensitivity. Tell us more. What does that mean?
Okay, so to break it down, basically, so culture is only one aspect of the social world around us and the structures that influence our beings. And when we talk about culture, the thing is, we live now in a world where in one household you would find multiple cultures. My culture is very different from my family's, and my families within them also, like my brothers, are very different from each other. So there isn't one singular culture that exists even within the same country. You might find cultural trends when we think about culture, because we need to avoid cultural exceptionalism. Like, if we come into communities assuming that they don't talk about sex, we will never get to a point of them reporting sexual abuse or reporting any form of sexual violence. But if we come to a community where we understand the structures that prevent them from speaking about sexual abuse, then we're more capable of understanding and addressing that sexual abuse. And when we talk about structural insensitivity, in particular, political structures, other social structures, relational structures, environmental, and even economic. So that simplification of culture and just be sensitive to the culture assumes a singular culture and assumes its exceptionalism as well.
So basically what you're saying is that saying that this is culturally sensitive here is a bit of a lazy way of going about it, and it's much more complex. And you can talk about it, but you just need to understand the context better with all these different pillars that influence and dimensions. If we move on to this topic that is, I think everyone can relate, which is about relationship at work. So just for the story, when we started at WHO this work, when we were doing open doors and we were speaking to the workforce, and one thing that came out with this work when we came out with the prevention to sexual misconduct, people were afraid that they couldn't have relationships with colleagues. And this famous phrase is, love is not allowed at work. But actually it is. It's just that you need to disclose so that, we make sure that there's no potential conflicts of interest. In your critique in your paper, you observed that some organization, apply this ban on all consensual relationships, and you say that they actually increase the risk of misconduct. Tell us more.
You cannot stop love. Like if two people, I think it begins with as simple as you cannot prevent people from falling in love with each other. And the working environment is one of the spaces where we meet people. Like most people spend at least 8 hours at work. That's like 1/3 of their day. So they're doomed to happen whether we like it or not.
So I find that so rigid, and I don't know. It compartmentalizes us in a way. So that's why a misconduct might happen, because people are so scared of saying we are in a relationship or I know that person, because they will be punished then.
Yes. And it's also, and why it increases the chances for misconduct as well, because these relationships, if they exist in the dark in a way, it does allow more room for abuse to occur. It also, so from that perspective, it is always better to let people be and then think about how to prevent or how to mitigate. Like if we don't want conflict of interest to exist at the workplace, we can think of ways to manage these relationships. You want to add Nof?
Yeah, sorry, I got excited about consent. We talk about consensual relationships. If we're two adults are consenting, so again, where is the consent in the respect? So we need to think about other ways of regulating those relationships rather than banning them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that well said. Well said. Another important concept that you've been speaking along this conversation, but also is part of your work, which is the mapping power, so that we understand this issue in more depth. And I think when I was reading your work, I was thinking this could be also a framework that supports the identification of risks of sexual misconduct. And so you break it into 4 types. There's the formal power, symbolic power, relational power, and emotional power. Can you walk us through how these different types of power operate, in real life, and how can us understanding those different nuances can help us better prevent sexual misconduct?
People would look at power in terms of the position the person occupies within the organization. However, what we're saying here is power is not just your position or the position you occupy, because you also have power from below. And that power from below is often the invisible, it's often the disregarded within organizational contexts. And what we mean by power from below, there might be 2 people within the same organization, someone with a high position another with a more junior position, but the person with the more junior position might have more social power than the person in the high position, which can also allow for room for abuse of power, and this power needs to be considered. And particularly when we talk about collectivistic contexts, for example, the relational power plays a massive part in our everyday dynamics. So, and when we talk about relational power, you might find someone in a junior position with relationships with people in power within the overall community that could allow them to be abusive within their organizations as well.
There is the emotional. Maybe I could have an emotional power on my colleague who she or he, they might have a senior positionality because of my charisma, the way I talk to them. I might have a symbolic power because I come from a specific family name, for example. So looking at power only like a top-down approach, it's so simplistic, and we will lose so much, I don't know. We wouldn't catch the intricacies and the complexities with how power is shaped and how we negotiate, maneuver those power structures.
So, and also other forms of power that we need to take into consideration is, for example, language. Because we know of an organization, for example, they were scared of getting rid of a serial bully. Because there were several bullying complaints against this person, because he was able of speaking English and he was the one point of contact with donors, not because he was the manager necessarily. So, this is the nuance that we're inviting.
And I want to also say something else. I know that most organizations, INGOs, all of those international protocols, they focus on sexual. The sexual is really important, but sometimes we need to look at, for example, other forms of abuse that take us, they don't operate on its own. It's always intersecting. Maybe someone is being sexually exploited, but before that they were maybe abused financially or economically or verbally. So focusing on only the sexual on its own when it comes. So for example, if someone is receiving a complaint and they don't see sexual, they dismiss it, that's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. We always tell organizations, look at the informal complaints, look at the other complaints that come, like maybe a complaint on the training venue. I don't know. Look for much more complexities within those contexts. Just don't treat it with no sexual, then it's not dangerous. Right. Because they all intersect.
And this also brings us to the idea that we should not be thinking of safeguarding as a standalone practice or a standalone department within organization. It also pushes us as organizations to rethink how we mainstream it as values and ethics within other departments as well.
Yeah, I think we've observed that as well within WHO, where people were actually asking us, you're doing a fantastic job on the sexual misconduct front. Can we talk about abusive conduct in general? Can this be included in a more broader term? So I think even people feel that. Before we wrap up, I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking this is, what brought you to do this work and what keeps you going?
I think we came into this work naturally and organically, to be honest. Yani, it was a progression. Because when we first started our professional careers in that sense within that field, as also independent organizers, we started as movement organizers, to be honest. And we started with the queer LGBT feminist community. And then while we were doing that work and we were trying to organize, we were trying to resource the movement, we were trying to resource also technically and financially, etc. What we found is the movements are not really working because of the abuse that is happening within those movements. There are so many abuses, including, for example, like people threatening each other to tell the police about their sexuality, people harassing each other, so many, they were rife in abuse, that we naturally found ourselves moving into a safeguarding direction. So this is what brought us to the work, I think.
And also we found ourselves that within, like as organizers in the movements, being part of different movements across the region, people wanted to silence like those abuses. We cannot justify our harmful practices because we are victims or we are marginalized.
Yes.
So that's why me and Nour like thinking, and it's serious. It didn't happen like, oh, one day we wake up like, oh, we want to be safeguarding experts. No. Organic, like we cannot be part of those. There's a cognitive dissonance. We cannot be part of those organizing of those movements. And we witness so much abuse inflicted on so
yes,
we said that we need to professionalize in a way, or I don't know, it happened, organically.
yes.
And what keeps you going though?
It came, I think it came from the idea basically that being marginalized does not excuse your abuse.
No.
So that was the starting point. What keeps us going, to be honest with you, it can be really difficult at times. And I want to say it really, it can be really difficult because what people aren't aware of yet is the amount of abuse safeguarding practitioners get themselves, to be honest. Like sometimes it can be as simple as, and it's really exhausting and tiring. We're still, of course, doing the work because we do believe that we need to change organizations from within. It's difficult to deal sometimes with organizational resistance to transformation. So what's keeping us going at the moment is that we integrated both aspects of organizational transformation with safeguarding because they need to happen in parallel. They cannot be happening in silos.
And to be honest, on a personal level, we take good care of ourselves, honestly. Sure. Like I know, like, we take breaks. We say, I don't want to do it now. I don't have the energy to do it. And we are okay with saying, no, I don't want to engage with that case, or I don't want to keep going. I want to take care of myself, because if I don't do that, switching off sometimes, we don't want to be in a status of burnout. I don't like the burnout because we become so reactive, and I don't like that feeling. I want to be able to strategize, think, rather than just being, So we do take care a lot of ourselves and each other, to be honest.
Yes. And therapy is very important to the field. Yeah, and it's really important if you deal with cases like that, you really need to be in therapy. The world around us pushes us to be in therapy.
Mm-hmm. No, I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially if they're in the field. They definitely can relate to the burning out, and it's something gradual that you don't even recognize happening to you, right? So prioritizing yourself and your self-care is, I think, a great advice. So thank you so much. And
it's a radical self-care. It's not coming from a selfish place. It's coming from, so I can keep going,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the system to be able to sustain itself, right? Otherwise, it would just crash.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nof and Nour, for taking the time to speak to us on the #NoExcuse podcast.
Thank you
so much. I really enjoyed it.
It was really nice. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us to prseah@who.int. Until the next time, goodbye.